All right. So welcome. Joining me this evening. Two incredible people, and we'll get to meet them in a second and get to hear a lot from them in a second. But I want to introduce the topic that we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be talking a little bit about leadership, and leadership can be a person, leadership can be a behavior, leadership can be a philosophy, an idea. And when it comes down to it, we all depend on it. And as people who depend on it, that means that we've been in the followership role as well. And so as a followership, in the followership role, we want to try to understand where it is and how it is that leadership is being discussed, developed, and the roles that we're expected to execute as good followers. And then we flip into the roles of leadership, and those expectations need to be just as clear. And I think it's really important. I'm excited to listen to these two phenomenal women this evening, but I'll let them introduce themselves. Please feel free.
Hi, I'm Jess, and I grew up in Grand Prairie, Alberta, playing soccer and volleyball, and then continued my soccer playing into college at GPRC here locally. And then I've been coaching in the community as well for the past 7 or 8 years. Now I'm just moving on to continuing my coaching as an assistant role with the women's program at the college as well. And yeah, that's me.
Great.
And I'm Paige Crozen. I'm originally from Humboldt, Saskatchewan. After, high school, I went down to the University of Utah for my, college education and played basketball down there. I've played with the Canadian national team for about 9 years, most recently with the 3-on-3 team in the 2019 Women's Series. I played 1 year professionally in Germany. I'm now currently the assistant coach for the University of Lethbridge women's basketball team, as well as the manager of the Living Skies Indigenous Basketball League, which is a nonprofit through the Aboriginal Friendship Centers of Saskatchewan. And so thank you, Matthew, for providing the platform to chat tonight.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I said, thank you, ladies. I mean, you already heard just a brief snippet of an example, and I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Matthew Bain. I'm a clinical counseling psychologist, but also a sport and performance psychology professional. I enjoy so much learning from the people that I've been in contact with. My tagline is, I know a lot about athletes, I know a lot about people, but I don't know a lot about you. And that's why I love, as a qualitative researcher, always hearing the stories. And the stories to me are so valuable. They enrich concepts, and they enrich things like, leadership behaviors, and they enrich even leaders. I am a leader, and my brain immediately goes, boom, okay, so then what does that mean to you? Like, is that just a letter on a shirt? Is that a formal? Is that an informal role? Is that, I really want to know, I want to get to know how somebody's going about the process of leadership. And so we have two amazing people here tonight to talk a little bit about it. And the first question I just kind of wanted to serve up is a nice big general questions. What's your first experience with effective leadership? What did you decide was effective leadership for you?
Well, for me, I suppose I wouldn't say and go as far as saying that up until this point I didn't have any effective leadership in my life. I would say that I had a lot of great leaders and many amazing coaches and people who led me in such powerful ways, but I have one particular leader as a coach who just stands out so much to me every time I think about a leader and think about aspiring to be like this type of a leader. And I just think she was one of the first females that I had in my older, I guess, playing career. And her leadership just stood out so much because she was able to connect with us on such a different level and relate to us as female athletes and partake in the same experiences that we were and relate what she was explaining to us from her lived experiences. And it was just something so different and powerful for me as a young athlete growing up to see what I could become or somebody that I could look up to in the same type of role that I was attaining to be. So that was, I guess, what I would think is my first really effective leader
Mm-hmm.
that I had. Yeah.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's very well said, Jessica. And so, similar to Jessica, like my upbringing, I played many different sports. I remember though when I kind of first started getting into sports, and then when I finished playing, I really feel like I've seen leadership kind of evolve over that time span. I feel like when I was first getting into competitive basketball was a lot of like yelling, you have to do this and have to be kind of tough. And then as I feel like the research has kind of evolved, now is more like personable and leading athletes with autonomy, and you don't have to be that way if it's not authentic to you. So I guess the leaders that were really moving to me, and I was very fortunate to have many really good leaders to look up to and aspire to, are the ones that, one, took a genuine interest in me. Two, I would say were authentic to who they were and their values, no matter their kind of leadership style. And then three, like helped me to attain a better level of performance because of their leadership. I was inspired by who they were, what they said, or their belief in me that ultimately brought out my best performance.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So both of you mentioned, I could just sum up the term, is the lived experience, right? That part of, Jess used the term lived experience, and Paige, you really led and segued into criteria of lived experience that was relevant at that time. I believe that, if I'm understanding correctly, that's that authenticity to you. And that doesn't unmoor from the situation. It's a part of it. It's right live in the moment, and it's shared deliberately as a form of effective connection, right? I like that really spoke to me in that. So I just build a little bit about it, the demonstration of even one of those criteria that you talked about, like just give that demonstration of lived experience that really stuck out for you in that leadership behavior.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, sorry, I always think back to is just, even it's such a simple thing, but didn't feel simple at the time. But this coach that I had would partake in our fitness, or would be there as an actual physical example of what we wanted to be, and was a part of that. And it's kind of what Paige was talking about. Instead of the yelling and the dominant, oh, go faster, do better, whatever, it was like we could see what she was doing, and we wanted to reach that potential that she was showcasing and demonstrating to us. And then just along with the lived experiences, again, preaching things that actually happened to her, or things that she actually experienced, rather than just, I guess, I don't know, like repeating the obvious things that coaches can just reiterate without no real context or meaning to it. And providing that context that she had made her so much more relatable, and made what she was saying, you could buy into it so much easier. It just felt natural.
Mm-hmm.
Oops, I was on mute. For me, I think the two big ones are, as I had mentioned previously, like someone who is genuinely interested in you as a person first before the athlete. That's what I was really inspired by. I really liked that connection. Once I was able to get to know the coach more on like a personal level, then it was easier for me to understand their leadership philosophy, or how they operated the way they did on the court. So I feel like it's like in this small moments, like, how are you today? How are your classes? How's everything going? Just those small check-ins always made a huge difference for me, no matter what level I was playing at. And I've seen coaches on both ends of the spectrum that have done that really well, and the ones that didn't. And so it's been me now stepping into the coaching role, reflecting back and evaluating, like, why did I follow that coach, or why was I so inspired or moved by that coach and not so much by this other coach? And then taking the pieces of what they've done or what I didn't like throughout my career, and trying to build something that's authentic to me when I'm coaching now a group of young women.
Mm-hmm. So both have mentioned the I want to say lived experience, but the live experience, right? That I'm that person first coaching, that it speaks to the idea of, Jess used the term like dominance. And if I'm yelling or if I'm hollering, I can yell and holler. Like, I remember hearing feedback from like 14 years after I retired from football coaching, as, you know, oh man, like Matt was the same volume voice from 5 yards away as he was from 80, right? It just didn't matter. It's like, I think he was just loud. No, he was just mad. No, he was loud, right? And so I'd have two people experience the exact same thing. And one's like, I was just loud and mad. And the other one's, no, he's just passionate. And it's like, I didn't control that narrative right away. But I also, one, I had a better rapport with, I had a more personal rapport with. The other, I didn't have that rapport. So it didn't come across the same way, right? So what I'm hearing the two of you say is, you know, and actually drew attention to that dominance part, is that a lot of the feminist theories talk about that neutrality, right? Like that power neutrality. It's not important to have power. It's important to recognize power, right? And I remember talking to a number of coaches about like accountability, and accountability is not a hierarchical thing. Accountability is a bunch of criteria that we all strive for, and that speaks to that power neutrality. And that really resonated for the two of you, that people got to know you as a person, right? And you got to know them as a person as well. That's really cool to articulate that. So if I'm hearing then, well, it's like, that's when you know you felt led. Is that right? Yeah. So then if knowing how you felt led, how do you articulate something like that in like a philosophy, in your own coaching, in your own leadership, in empowering others? How do you articulate something like felt led? And when I felt led,
I think going back kind of to what Paige was talking about when she was saying the making connections with an athlete as a person first before the athlete, and creating that mutual respect for each other through trust and faith and just understanding of one another. And I think a lot of it falls back to what Paige was saying, again, the communication. It's not just, okay, let's go, let's get going. It's how are you doing? What can I do to help you? And to be that person who's there to support the whole person rather than just the athlete. I think that's, yeah, what I would think.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell a quick story before I kind of get into your question, Matt. When I was first kind of getting into competitive sport, I was named like captain of a team, and I've never been like a great speaker. I don't really enjoy like public speaking, so I'm definitely not like a communication first kind of leader. I would say mostly like I try to lead by example first. At least I was when I was an athlete, and so I really had to try to develop my communication and you know, like holding players accountable. That's something that has been very much so learned for me. And the coach said to me after our season, or after our time together, he said, you know, when you go to university, like you're going to need to learn how to get thicker skin to be able to like hold players accountable and get on players. And that's how he very much was as a coach. And it stuck with me. That was probably like a decade ago. I still think about it now. But it didn't feel right to me at the time. And since, you know, like, as I mentioned before, making the transition, I guess in order to lead players effectively is like finding something that's authentic to you. So like I could yell at Jessica and be like, you need to do this and this and this. And she probably won't feel led by me because that's not how I am as a person. It just wouldn't be authentic to who I was, or my leadership style, or how I carried myself. And although I respected coaches that have had that type of leadership, it's just not true to me. So I guess, like I had mentioned before, like finding a leader that's authentic to their values and who they are, and have that kind of like shine through in all aspects of their life, not just on the court, is something that I really value and try to live up to the best that I can.
So then can I just say, like, that would be to you accountability, that would be the criteria that you're living up to, not you.
I guess so. Let me think about that. Accountability or authenticity.
Yeah. Well, and so my sort of dichotomy when it comes to those words, I have a lot of fun with the term accountability, because I tell the story of the first time I ever heard the term accountable used. I was a cook at Earl's, and my manager came home from week-long meetings in Vancouver and said, okay, you know, we're going to be more accountable as a staff. And I looked around and I said, Brad's in charge of the budgets. And I went back to work, and I remember my boss is like, well, no, that's not accountable. And I said, okay. And I just kind of went with it. I was just like, all right, great. And then there was something screwed up in the kitchen. And he said, who's accountable? And I said, Brad, he's got the budgets. Because to me, accountable was accounting. And he just kept using this term until finally, it was about 2 weeks later, I said, what does that mean to you? And he goes, accountable. I went, oh, gotcha. Like, I still had no idea. Like, he couldn't explain it. I didn't know. And I remember a very, very bright law student. She was a server at Earl. She came over to me and she said, accountability is a really interesting way of saying responsibility. And I went, oh, okay, well, that makes a ton of sense then. And I said, like, well, what, like, and we still couldn't talk about it. So when I'm hearing authenticity, that there's an external form of it in accountability, but I'm going to share those things authentically. If I'm going to say I'm about respect, and then I'm demonstrating a level of disrespect perceived by others, then I'm not being accountable to respect. But I can power about that whole thing and spin it onto me and say, you're not being accountable to me. And now we have the merry-go-round of accountability, right? And that to me is just like, okay, like, what are we actually talking about right now, right? Does it gets lost in leadership? It gets lost in, you're the captain, you're accountable for your troops, and as a result, your troops aren't performing. So I loved you shared that other one, because I've done goal setting on thicker skin, as you need to grow thicker skin, and then I went set goals for thicker skin. And then everybody went, I don't get it. But I've heard that term a lot. You got to grow thicker skin. I said, you're telling someone how they need to be. I think that's called gaslighting. As a term, I'm like, I don't think those things marry up. But like, how do you do that, right? So as a leader, how do you develop thicker skin in people? I don't know. I'm going to put that right back to the two of you. How do you grow? How do you get others to grow thicker skin? I'm saying that sincerely, not just in a humorous way. But how would you get others to grow thicker skin?
Well, I kind of think, I don't know if this would exactly answer that question, because I don't know if I have an answer to that exactly, but I don't think it's about making somebody, like you said, change or be different or grow thicker skin or to be something that they're not. I think as part of your role as a leader is to effectively lead in a way that works for each and every person that you're leading, and adapting those ways to fit the needs of each person that you're coaching or leading or whatever it is that you're doing. So yeah, I think it's not really about having that person, making them change to fit your style of leadership. I think it's about how can you lead in an effective way that meets the needs of every single person.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the coach that I had that conversation with was talking about, like, if someone is, I'll try not to talk in basketball terms, but like doing something incorrectly on the court, and it's an easy fix that you can just say when you're running down the court, like, hey, on the ball screen, do this next time instead of what you're currently doing. That has always been a struggle for me, just communicating that. And obviously the communication and vocalizing kind of what the team needs is a huge part of leadership. So for me, it's kind of like getting outside of my comfort zone and being able to like provide instruction in a way that's authentic to me, but knowing that, if I don't tell them, that just does a disservice to them as well as the entire team. So finding a way to kind of, elevate the level of play in a way that's true to, like how Paige is as a leader and how I choose to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what I think is a fantastic answer from both of you. I kind of want to transcribe that and just post it as an answer to that, because what the two of you just said was skill acquisition, right? And maybe the outcome comes to like the observation that people are harder, or they're less sensitive. I don't even know what that thicker skin part is, but the idea is, skill acquisition, understanding oneself, reflection, even as, Paige delved into a little bit, there was sport culture. What's the culture of that sport? Right. And when you experience so many, like how many coaching experiences have the two of you had that are just different, right? And each of them are ingesting that sport culture in a different way. And as a result, spin that into how am I going to foster leaders and leadership in my program, right? And so if they all, come out to a place of, you've got to be harder or more mentally tough or more determined, and there's nothing beneath that, then it's just lick and stick and see what hits the wall and stays in your program versus really effectively developing the concept of leadership or the construct of leadership and followership in your program. So I like really well said answers. Sure, I threw something at the two of you and you just got like both game show stoicism as like an answer. It's just like, yeah, this is how it goes. All right, there we go. See, this is why we're talking.
Yeah, and to build kind of off of your topic there, it's just like if I'm like a yeller, I guess we just can't make the assumption that all athletes are the same. Like I have to know myself as a leader too, but then I also have to take the time to have an understanding of my athletes and how they operate, because the way that one athlete is motivated will be completely different than the other, and how you communicate to each of those athletes may differ. So with the belief that you can be the same kind of leader to all your athletes, I think is incorrect.
Yeah. And I think also so often I hear from coaches or just everyone like, oh, that player's soft, they're sensitive. And it's like such a negative light that shines on those people. And I just always think, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with an athlete being sensitive and having strong feelings and passion for what they're doing? Because sport is so much more than just the person's ability on the field or the court or whatever they're doing. They're real people, and sport is building them up to live this lifelong life experiences that they're going to. So I just think that telling somebody to grow thicker skin is a disservice to who they are as a person, because there's nothing wrong with feeling those feelings. So and I say that because I'm also very sensitive. So
Well, I don't envy those that aren't. Right. I think understanding emotional intelligence is like this undertone in education everywhere. Social emotional learning is not as deliberate as it could be in the curriculums in school. And it definitely isn't there in the sport, but it's growing because you see the mental side is, all of a sudden it starts with mental health. Like, oh, we're really worried about our athletes right now. Well, we should have always been, but we took the sport culture adage of removing that. And then it wasn't the responsibility of anybody to care about the mental health, well-being, and performance of the mind. It was about trying to mold yourself into becoming this that we thought that was the best mind to play as and or to compete as. And then we ask everybody to strive for that. And that doesn't make a lot of sense when we're talking about the individuality of each of the athletes. So to me, they're like, if you turn down that model and you go as in a leadership role, now you're executing the effective qualities of a leader, right? And so the effective qualities of a leader, talked about communication already, talked about the giving yourself that face time, that in-person time to get to know people as people, to understand what their goals are. So what other qualities that you have that resonate for you as effective leadership? Thinking about people too, you can think about who that was, but also just think about the qualities that they demonstrated so that they can percolate to the qualities of leadership as opposed to living within a person, right? What are some of those qualities?
I think just enthusiasm is a big one always for me for what you're doing, just being all in and excited about what you're doing. So that way you're able to give so much of yourself to what it is and taking the time to really do the best that you can for the people that you're leading. That's always a big one for me. And I just always think if I'm not enthusiastic about what I'm doing, then I'm not going to be giving as much as I can be to that thing. And I would be doing a disservice to those people involved. So yeah, I think that would be a really big one for equality. And then just just an understanding of the well-rounded athlete and what it is that they need from you and what it is that you are able to give. And like Paige just talked about, the being your authentic self. So having an understanding of yourself and your philosophies, understanding what your role is and what you can provide, and understanding what they need from you, I guess, or those would be really two big qualities for me.
I agree. Some ones that are important to me, or some qualities that are important to me, would I really value like coaches and leaders that are very direct, that just get right to the point and tell you like the truth. And secondly, I really value coaches in particular, in my experience with sport, that are prepared, that take their craft seriously. And I know that sport is about having fun and enjoying the game. So finding the balance of like being prepared for what you're doing, while still being able to enjoy and understand that it is a game.
I like those, like enthusiasm, communication, understanding, authenticity, directedness, being prepared, and then still cultivating an idea or a culture of fun. And like, you know, can I tell a story? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I had like when I was coaching with the swim club in Grand Prairie, you know, I was being the head coach, and I really took on the role very seriously in coach development. And my assistant coaches were just phenomenal young women, all of them having come through the program in some capacity and embracing really the coaching role. They'd all kind of left the swimming role and embraced the coaching role. And the idea that we're going to get rid of punishment was very foreign to them initially. I said, we're done. We're not punishing athletes anymore. It's all positive conditioning ideas, positive models. And that was very hard for a lot of them to get out of. Like if they were, you know, being defiant, we'll kick them out of the water and give them push-ups. Like, why are you giving them push-ups? We're a swim team, right? Now that's 3 minutes, 4 minutes that they're out of the water, not swimming. That doesn't make any sense to me. So we had to find different ways to communicate. But I also remember, like, you know, I prided myself in being, you know, in a performance coach role. And I remember one of my assistant coaches came to me, and her sister was in my group, and her sister's working her butt off, like just absolutely never misses practices, 9 times a week, 3 times dry land, like just working her butt off. And she comes to me one morning, and she's, you know, she spends a morning a week with me in my group, and I let her coach the group, and, you know, and then I go coach her group. It was really a lot of fun. And she just she's flat out says to me, she turns to me and she goes, "This isn't fun enough." And I just remember going, what? Like, and I thought I was having a blast, right? Like, it's a great time. And she goes, "It's not fun enough." And I, you know, and I was like, at the back of my mind, I'm like, well, you coach younger kids, I had all these wonderful arguments, as academic arguments that I could just kind of create. And then I went, yeah, you're probably right. And she goes, what? And I said, yeah, like, what do you want to do? And she just looks at me, she's like, oh. And then so she spent like 10 minutes on the pool, like just writing down fun ways to do the sets that I designed for the week to achieve the same aerobic goals or anaerobic goals or strength goals, which is a lot of fun. And I started to integrate that idea. Every single practice I had this thing, okay, but then it had to have autonomy in it, and it had to have fun in it. And those were the banners for me in every practice to plan. And it changed my feelings in the practices. It changed, like, I wanted to see people have fun and just be like, you know, on their butts to get in the fun stuff. Like, are we supposed to have fun right now, Matt? Is that what we're doing right now? And I'm like, I don't know, are you having fun? And they're like, well, kinda. And they had like let themselves go because they're not sure, like, ooh, I don't know, Matt's not gonna let us have fun, you know. And it was up to me to create those things. And then I started to think like, no, I need you guys to do that. So I had a leadership group that did that for every group, you know, all the way out, like from our senior group all the way down to little kids. We said 2 or 3 leaders in each of the groups cultivate fun every single day, every single practice. And obviously there were some tougher ones that weren't as much fun to people, right? But that's always going to be that way. But when you're saying like that's demonstrating leadership, and all it took was her just to poke me, like, this isn't fun. Yeah, well, it's fun to me. But that doesn't mean it's fun to you, right? So I I didn't see it and get it at the time, even though I had it written, as part of our fundamental philosophy as coaches, but I wasn't doing it. Right. And it was a gap. And so someone else needed to come and say it to me. Right. And so how do you demonstrate those things? Or maybe let's go the other side. What are some of the experiences that were less effective, where enthusiasm wasn't there, that you felt like it could have been, and it weighed heavy on you? Or that authenticity where you felt like maybe there was an attempt at it, but it wasn't there. The directedness, right? It was meant to be, effective, but it was not effective. Like, give me some examples of what that ineffective sort of operational leadership behavior looks like. And obviously, names are not important because, in the moment, right? We never, what's the saying? You never quarterback from an armchair or something like that. I don't know, something ridiculous like that. But tell me a little bit about maybe one of those ineffective ways that was delivered for you.
I can start with this one. In my experience, and I think I've spent actually quite a few years or practices in my career playing basketball in fear of, like making a mistake, or I don't know, just scared of not doing something correctly. I was always conscientious as an athlete. So, but that's not sport. That's not why people play sports. We don't play sports to like live in fear of making a mistake. So that would be an ineffective kind of culture, is a culture where athletes can't feel like they can make a mistake or have to be afraid that they'll be punished for missing a layup or, not making the correct read.
Yeah, I really, really agree with that. And even part of my philosophy in education for teaching is that students need to be in an environment where they are free of fear of failure, and that they can incorporate a growth mindset into their daily activities, because they need to look at failure as a first step in learning, rather than, oh, I can't do this, and changing their mindset for that. And I definitely agree. And I also had many years of my career where I was playing in fear. And one of a very ineffective leadership style that I had was, I guess, a style of humiliation, which sounds kind of extreme, but it truly was based around humiliation. And it was just so personal, and people 100% were afraid at all times and on edge. And then the reality is, if you're not enjoying what you're doing and you're living in that fear and experiencing that, you're not going to want to keep doing it. Same with sports, same with education. A student who's afraid of reading out loud because they're afraid of it, they're not going to want to keep reading in their own time, and same with a person who's afraid at their practice to make a mistake or miss a shot. They're not going to want to keep going to practice and keep playing. So I think I agree, that's a very big one for me. And then along with that, and the humiliation and the fear, just a lack of emotional control, I guess, and just like the understanding and what you're saying, that sport, it's like, that's not why people play sports. And a person doesn't need to feel that and getting yelled at for mistakes, and the coach who is unable to see the bigger picture and just loses their temper at little minor things all the time. Like, I think, yeah, that's a really big one, and that also adds to the fear for sure.
Paige, what are your thoughts on echoing some of Jess's statements there? You're nodding a lot.
Yeah. I just have been there, so I was like, yep, I can envision the exact scenario, different sports, completely different locations, but yeah. So that definitely resonated with me.
Well, and Paige, you mentioned, conscientiousness as an athlete, and Jess, you mentioned like that growth mindset, that effort-based sort of idea of being able to step on the pitch or step on the court or wherever you are to put out that effort. And so you've got hardworking and effortful people who are determined to be successful. And when we talk about the emotions that would lead those two characteristics or qualities to grow, we wouldn't imagine lining fear up with that, right? One would be a personality characteristic, the other one would be a fostered ability. And yet we don't line up fear as the third criteria, right? And, you know, the idea that a person should be afraid as soon as they are, like, and not like, you know, I'm going to get, you know, stabbed in a dark alley afraid, but the fact that I have a fine skill set that gets completely hijacked by an emotional state that's a protective and defensive state seems like a strange place to operate to try to get athletic excellence going. Right. And so when you foster that environment, it's, you know, it becomes its own entity that we're not always in control of. And I found that as soon as I got out of the way as a coach, uh, they flourished. Like I always say that, like I got out of the way of them because they reached and exceeded my abilities. And I was just like, whoa. And same with my assistant coaches, and they were getting headhunted. And they're like, you're growing an incredible program. I'm like, nope, that's them, right? We created the environment for them to do it, and they're doing it. And that's it. Like, that's all we did, right? It's like getting credit for home builders when all I did was put the concrete in. Like, no, I didn't do anything. I just laid the foundation. So
Yeah. Sorry.
go ahead.
About just like the environment that you built,
Mhm.
or the culture that you were able to build.
What about it?
Can you talk about like what was the environment that you strived to kind of like to achieve?
Well, one of the biggest things was the foundation. This is what got me fascinated in motivation, was autonomy. You know, their basic needs met in self-determination theory: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And autonomy being really key, especially for older athletes. So we got the mantra of like, well, you're in Northern Alberta, so you can't really retain older athletes because you have to train too much for swimming. So, you know, there's no point. It's like, well, let's see if we can. And then the idea that they had choices, right? If you're in this group, it's, you got to be able to do these things and swim this fast. It's like, okay, but it was never race-based. It was training-based. And so if you could hit the training times, you're more than welcome to join the group. If you didn't want to join the group, that was okay too. And all of a sudden people are like, well, I get to freely move to that group. It's not up to the coach. No, here's your criteria, like, give her. And they do test sets every kind of 2 or 3 weeks. And if athletes wanted to try them, they were integrated in a stepwise way throughout the week. And really it was up to the athletes' efforts when they wanted to put the work in that they got out of it. And the exciting parts were that, you know, on any given time, you know, traditional sport culture or the socio-cultural elements of sport coaching in swimming would have, you know, parameters put on athletes. Like, if you don't hit this, you do it again. And I'd check in with my athletes right from the get-go, like, where are you at as far as energy goes? And they're like, well, I'm, you know, I had a test today in bio. I'm bagged. I didn't have a chance to get lunch today because I was studying for my bio test. And it's like, okay, well, how much do you think you put in today? Well, I'm putting in 100%. Okay, so if you have 100% of 80% of your energy, let's do this then. Here's the set time, you know, 10 hundreds on 120. I can hit 122s. Well, then hit 122s. Oh, really? Yeah. Okay, well, what if I can hit 120s? 120s. Okay, well, I'll try to see. It's like, all right. And then all of a sudden, I'm not the one screaming and hollering to motivate them. And they're going, okay, I'm hitting 118s, Matt. Like, then keep it there. I think it's 118, 118. Oh, it's 119. It's like, okay, 119 on the board. I don't know if I can hold this. 2, 1, go. Right on the prompting go, the stopwatch. That's it. And they come back, they hit 118 again. And, you know, it's like, you surprised yourself. I didn't have anything to do with that. Mm-hmm. You invite a culture of ability, and invite a culture of effort, and invite a culture of autonomy into an athlete's world. They'll smash the ceiling out of the place. Mm-hmm. But if I control that 120 or do it again, what am I motivated for? To avoid disappointing you? Well, I better have a great relationship. And now I'm actually threatening my relationship with the athlete in order to just get them to do something, which I often term harvesting. So if I want to harvest athletes, I just got a swim mill here and, we'll spit out some athletes at the end. Or I just really want to get to know athletes. I want to get to know what they're really capable of, what they believe they're capable of. Right. And so like, that's what I mean. Like when you're talking about authenticity, we're open and we're genuine and like, oh, I really screwed that up. Right. For athletes to hear, like, what do you mean you screwed that up? Like, clearly nobody has energy tonight. And I tasked you guys with this. And even my hardest working athletes and my most excuse-riddled athletes are both hitting the same times. Yep, on me. And they'd be like, okay, now what? I said, well, swim down. Let's hop out. Let's stretch it out. Let's reset. Right. But that you're taking ownership of that always has been to me. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't call it that, but accountability. That's integrity. Right? Nobody knows other than me. So why would I call it out? Well, because they know it, they feel it. And so that's authenticity. That's integrity. I could make it about them. You're not giving me enough effort. Well, who? All of them? Like that. That seems strange. Common denominator would be me. So think about like an athlete experience that might have come from a coach that coached the way I was talking about, or maybe to spin it to the roles you currently play. How do you foster that in the athletes that you're working with?
Well, I guess I do like to kind of go off of what you were saying too. And I aim to try to foster in athletes that they are the ones in the driver's seat of their own development and they're even students in their own learning at schools. And as a coach or a teacher, a leader in whatever avenue you're a part of, I think that you are there to help facilitate that development and learning. And I think that unless it's in the athlete and they're putting in the work, they're the ones who have to do it. There's only so much really that a coach can say or demonstrate, but that it's the athlete and it's their choice and it's in their control how much they achieve or what levels they get to, I suppose. And I just think, yeah, like I always feel like coaches, and like you were saying, a coach who is always putting the onus on like, oh, you're disappointing me. And it's like, so you're always striving to reach this potentially unattainable goal of having this 100% pride in like from your coach, but whereas what you really should be doing is trying to become the best version of yourself as an athlete. So I found that when I had coaches who allowed me to develop in a way that worked in my timeline or that worked for me or work on the things that I needed to work with and who provided me patience in those ways, that's when I developed the most. But whereas a coach always who harping, oh, you need to do better, I'm disappointed, I wanted more tonight, I this, and it's like, okay, so who is it about then? Why is it about the coach being fulfilled? It should be about the athlete being fulfilled, I guess.
I think that was really well said, Jessica. And the same idea kind of came to my mind too. And it's a way, like in many ways, I'm rewiring my brain because when I was an athlete, it'd be like, I need to get this kind of arbitrary number and not really know why. But I was working with a group of athletes on Tuesday this week, and some of them were new to basketball. Some of them had a couple of years of experience, but we were doing like a shooting drill. And they're like, well, what number do we need to get? And it was an individual shooting drill. It's like, well, first off, this is some people's third practice ever. So like, try it. This will be the benchmark. And then when we revisit the same drill next week, like, let's try to just like match that goal. Like you had mentioned, Jessica, just kind of, trying to be like their best selves as athletes, trying to beat their benchmarks instead of trying to achieve some arbitrary number that I create in my head that I think is good as a coach.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the goal setting principles is who set the goals, right? I mean, it's literally a foundational element of goals. Like you talk about the SMART goal setting principles, and I love the S put on the end. Are they self-determined, right? And so looking at those leadership, like I think is enthusiasm, communication, understanding, authenticity, being direct in communication, preparedness, fun, humility. You've got all these great characteristics, qualities, those kinds of things. What steps would you take? How would you take one of them even and go, we're going to develop this in our leaders. We're going to develop this in our leadership group. And as a goal, you can put that on the table, but then the how do they do that? Like, how would you do that? Choose one of those, even, enthusiasm, communication, understanding, authenticity, self-reflection, directedness, preparedness, fun, humility. I'll just keep throwing them at you if you want, but like, but choose one of those as a goal and say, this is what I want leadership to be, to be spoken about in our program and in our team. How would you do that?
Well, I guess I think, I don't know a specific one, but I guess to speak on enthusiasm, even, I think like if you are wanting to instill that in certain leaders or people in your team, I think even just having conversations like, what does enthusiasm even mean to you? Like, what do you think enthusiasm looks like? And what do you think you can do to show that to the team or to the people around you? Because I think so often people potentially have different definitions of things, and what they might think is commitment might not be what you think is commitment, or vice versa. So then somebody who thinks that they're really demonstrating this leadership quality might not be to the standard that you want them to be, but they just may need your leadership to help them get to that point. They may never have had a coach or a leader in their life who pushed them farther than that limit. So then maybe they think, oh, I'm really, really good at being enthusiastic, or I'm really good at communication. But whereas they actually have so much growth that they can keep going for. So I think, yeah, just like having open conversations and open minds and discussing things of how they can get there and goals that they can set in ways that they can show those qualities is where I would start, I guess, with an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting kind of about like this discussion and my career, like so many times in goal setting was like our goal was to win, and then everything else would just like kind of fall under that. And like now trying to work with teams and other leaders that I've worked with, it's about like setting the foundation. It's about the enthusiasm, communication, humility, whatever those kind of like pillars are. Like that's the foundation. If we get those kind of qualities first, then winning will come eventually.
Mm-hmm. So it's taking I always like the conversation I've had with so many coaches. So, okay, what are your goals? And Paige, you mentioned, is like, well, I'm going to win. And my follow-up question to that immediately is like, has anybody said lose?
Yeah.
Like, what coach is like, listen, we are going to tank. We are going to absolutely tank this. Here's LOSE, and breaking down our goals from like, why does that even have to be said at competitive levels? And why is it said at all at development levels? Right? If I'm a U11 coach, we're going to crush the opponent. And my U11 kids like, I just want my dad to smile, right? Like that's it. So in essence, you're, okay, wow, swing and a miss. So if I'm developing enthusiasm and I'm like, okay, how do we do that? And now you go out to that practice, or you go out to, how do you win? You win if our enthusiasm meter was 8 out of 10 today, or my leadership group's enthusiasm was, they were 6 or 7 out of 10, but I don't assign that number, they do. They're going to be way harder on themselves than I ever would. And the younger they get, the harder on themselves that they get, except for that one exception on the team. It's like, we crushed it. And it's like the worst, nobody did anything that day. But, I just think when you start that conversation, it goes from a person who's just a really excitable, positive individual, which, I could suggest to Jess's U14 team, which was 100% of the girls in the room, right? Every single one was like super positive, enthusiastic. It was like watching a cheer team who also was really good at soccer, right? And then you think, okay, so do we have to talk about enthusiasm? Maybe not, but we probably should put it out there as something we're achieving. Mm-hmm. Everybody feels good when you achieve that. And Paige, if I'm understanding you right, that's what you're talking about, developing that foundation from here to up. It's like, we've already got that pillar, we're crushing it. Well, why would we not talk about it though? We're crushing it. Let's keep crushing it, right? Just keep going with it. So it's not like, oh, it's implied. Like, what? I honestly don't think anything is implied in sport other than what the sport culture layers onto us to believe that we actually have to meet some weird or arbitrary goal. So that's the only thing that I think is sort of implied, right? So then what are the skills, the actual like skill set? Because I always think leaders are born, leaders are developed. And I don't think leaders are born. I think personalities are born. But I also think leaders are developed. And, you know, Paige, you were immediately, you drew attention to something you didn't have as a leader. I wasn't this. You're like, oh, all right. So what are the skills that you feel you'd put in front of, you know, leaders and say, or leaders, or sorry, that personify leadership that you would want people to want to develop, actively develop? What are some of those skills?
Well, I guess just like you had touched on the belief that leaders don't necessarily have to be born. I wouldn't say I was a born leader. Like very much so like a born competitor. There's videos of my sister and I being like, I'm gonna eat more spaghetti when I was 4. So I like always have had that competitiveness, which pairs well with sport, but not always so much like a vocal hold someone accountable, like we had talked about, kind of personality. So that has very much something that I've had to like grow and develop. So just kind of to start the belief that, you know, even though you may not think that you're a leader, if you choose to achieve that and that's something that you want for yourself, you can, you know, like work towards it by acquiring new skills or getting outside your comfort zone or whatever it may be.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that there's so many times that we put leaders into a box, like the leader is the captain, and it's not the case. And leaders can be in so many different forms, you know, like you're saying, there could be the quiet leaders or the outspoken leaders or the ones who constantly lead by example. But I think that like a common ground that all leaders that I've experienced that are really powerful leaders and that really, as Matt would say, cast their shadow strong and big would be just consistency. You know, they give their effort and they maintain that positive attitude and they show strength and consistency in adversity, and they don't make or excuses for themselves, and they set the high expectations and they remain consistent with those things throughout whatever it is that they're facing. But I really think, yeah, that leaders are not just one specific person with a certain checklist of qualities that have to be, okay, yep, these are all the things that they have, they're a leader. But I just think, yeah, for one thing I've always noticed is consistency.
Mm. Well, just as a sidestep, then, whose job or whose role is it to foster the self-reflection or to help guide the self-reflection for something like that, for that consistency, or for that, you know, as Paige meant, like look at the personal inventory for oneself and say, here are my skills. I want to develop them. Who's tasked with that role of self-reflection and the skill of self-reflection in order for them to do that?
Well, I don't know. I would say that I, without knowing it, was probably self reflecting on the qualities that I wanted to possess forever, but not necessarily in a very like formal or well structured kind of self reflection way. But once I started getting a bit older, I remember having leaders talk to me about those sort of qualities and that these are important and this is how you can grow in these ways. And I think that for young leaders and young athletes growing up, it's really important for them to have that person to look up to and a role model or see themselves in representation. So a young girl can see that there's a female coach coaching them and they can have that person to help guide them and facilitate that self-reflection. But I don't know if I would say that it's either the athlete or the coach's particular, it's their job. I think it's kind of a collective effort that the person has to be willing to self-reflect and learn and grow. But also it's important and very helpful to have that person and that leader to help guide an individual through that.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Matt.
Yeah.
In my organization, that's not really, it's a nonprofit, not related to sports specifically. There's like a questionnaire for new employees that were onboarded, like, what are your core values? How do you like to give and receive feedback? Where like that's one of like the first exercises that's performed, and then reflecting back is like, I don't know if I've done that with my teams probably something that I should be doing, because it should be integrated into sport. And then when you know, or you can have that kind of transparency about how, well, one, they need to reflect on, how do I like to receive feedback? Or they may never have been asked, so they may not know, but it could open the door to kind of that self-discovery.
I like that. I think that both almost like a informal, cultivation of a community that, whether it's role models, whether it's informal sort of, reflection, going back and forth for oneself afterwards, bouncing ideas off of peers, or whether it sort of formalizes and starts the conversation about, how do I best receive that? I want to ask the question a little bit, because I think both of you likely had this experience, and I know as an athlete I did, and I know as a coach, I started to value the honesty that came from athletes when they trusted me more, that I would take what they said seriously. And so, that process, even as feedback, like how best do you like to receive feedback? How many athletes do you say, how many leaders do you feel are giving the answer that the coach wants to hear, or giving the answer for the way that they've heard it, but not necessarily wanted it? Right?
Yeah, I think that probably a lot do. And I think that a lot of times I would have been that player and trying to please the coach. And even kind of going back to what had mentioned earlier about coaches, or just people in general, looking down on that soft, sensitive type of manner, attitude in an athlete. I am that person and always have been that person, but I definitely found myself being conditioned to be kind of like hardened and tougher, and being able to
Thick
take
skin.
yeah, I take those things, and I would never have wanted to admit to a coach, especially one who was very harsh and aggressive with their feedback. I never would have wanted to admit and say, oh, that's hard for me to take it that way, because I would have felt like I was not living up to their standards, or not being strong enough and a good enough leader. So I think that probably a lot of people would fall into that same category. I don't know. I guess I can only speak for myself, but yeah, I definitely wouldn't have wanted to necessarily give an honest answer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Matt, this is probably something that you've talked to Dave with at the U of L about, when freshmen kind of come in, or like the athletes that are just returning or getting there from high school. When you ask them, they're always like good, with like really big eyes. And then what Dave has done a really good job of is kind of like developing that trust with his athletes, and then they know that, like his intention, and he's built that rapport with them, that they can give him an honest kind of answer without reprimand or some kind of punishment as a result.
There's removal of that fear, right? And like, I just like, that's really what resonated from both those answers. It's like, if I don't fear you asking me this question authentically, then I'm not likely to give, like, well, I don't want any, right? There aren't going to be many athletes that are going to offer that back, but there are going to be people who are going to go, well, this is how I've received it in the past. What other ways are you supposed to? Like, they just don't know. Right. So like you said, it probably blindsides a lot of athletes when that initial question comes, and then it gets asked again, and then it gets asked again, and then it gets asked again. And it's like, I already told you. And then they realize that, oh, you're asking because you don't believe me? No, I'm asking because I don't know that you've actually told me. And then it becomes okay, well, I'll dip a toe in the water, talk honestly, and then, and there's no repercussion. Right? We all strive for feedback, but that idea of positive vulnerability, striving for, to be the courageous athlete we want to be, or to be the performance athlete we want to be, that means that we've got to feel like, I can push this performance, I can push this practice, I can push this weight room, I can push myself in the gym, I can push myself in the locker room as a leader, without someone coming by and going, that's not really the way it needs to be done. Here it is, just squash, right? Like that initiative that falls out. So like, I feel like the two of you are sort of like, I want to pitch this to you then. We talked about, especially, role models. right? How do the two of you see yourselves as role models for others? What are some of the ways that you've received feedback that maybe you are one? Talk a little bit about that role.
Well, I guess I don't know, from like, I guess when I was
Do
younger.
this, Jess. Just do this. Just do this.
But I don't know, I guess like feedback just from coaches at a young age. And I know even like Paige had mentioned like becoming a captain or getting into that role from a young age. So I guess it kind of just starts from those sort of things and receiving the positive feedback from your coaches and then sort of taking on those little like assigned leadership roles. And then like from a young age, and then you sort of feel that you have that impact on the people around you. And I think just like as things grew, and especially for me, my situation was maybe a little bit unique because I grew up in a smaller city in a smaller club. So I played with the same group of girls my whole life, even into college. So it's kind of like we all formed our roles together and learned how we worked and molded together and just had such like a unique bond to one another that we all kind of fit into our roles. And I guess I just sort of found my role as one of the leaders amongst the group. So yeah, but I guess it would start by just like those little positive feedbacks from coaches along the way from a young age. And then, yeah, just continued on from there.
Mhm.
Good question,
Yeah.
Matt. And Jessica's like, yeah, you can take this one first. I'm not really too sure, to be honest.
Yeah, I know. I
I've fluctuated at different parts throughout my career, but I don't have a meaningful answer to share. And it's something that's probably going to keep me up during the night. So thank you. But I'll have to get back to you. I don't have anything. I can't say that there is one like instance in particular that stands out where it's like, yep, now I'm a role model.
Mhm. Well, and you got to wonder because I wanted to have just a nice reflection because it's good because if there were in three of us are in a room, you two can't see your faces, but because you're on Zoom, you or on on a Zoom call, you can see your faces. And if those of you that are watching, I just want a banner that would fly across the screen that would say humility right underneath it. It was just like these two, humble leaders. And I just asked them, how are you a role model?
Don't
right,
you know we don't like talking about ourselves?
Wow. So if, but wouldn't that suggest though that power neutrality, right? That role neutrality, the power neutrality, you're immediately turnstiling the gifts that you have and offering them back to others, right? It isn't this like I walk out of the gym with my fluffy peacock feathers all puffed out and say, have you seen my pretty colors? Because I am the role model, right? Whereas a lot of people want to claim humility, but then others watch that as a projection of power, right? And sometimes you got to convince people that they cast a role model shadow or that they play that role. And it's not in a way of like, hey, heads up, you got a whole bunch of people around you that are watching you. It's the idea that they're watching what you do and how you do it. And that to me is one of those foundational or core pieces of self-reflection, right? To not know, you don't know something about yourself and someone draws attention to you and you go, really? And now I'm like, okay, now I'm self-conscious.
Yeah.
And Matthew, I'm sure you can kind of relate to this. Like when I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, Poppy, and I guess like being a role model, it's, like she picks up on everything that I do. So then it really shows like how much they're absorbing or like the people around you absorbing, because then she goes and does something and it's like, oh, that's me, for both positive and negative. When it's good, it's like, yeah, good job, we'll celebrate that. That's me. But yeah, I guess that would be like a great indication of like being a role model positively or negatively is like having a little human around that's a reflection of who you are and everything that you do and what you're about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Jess is going to get it in kindergarten here really shortly. We just have 30 little humans just,
Yeah.
so But I like, I love to share this story. My 3.5-year-old's the same sort of sentiment. He was strolling by one day. He's got no shirt on. He's just wearing shorts, and he said, "Can we go to the park?" I said, "We can't go to the park. It's COVID, and can we do this? We go to the pool." I said, "We can't go to the pool. It's COVID." And he's walking by, and I'm sitting there, and it was like a movie was just being shot at that moment. He goes, "Fucking germ," and I went, "Oh, okay." Like, I didn't know, and he was just like dead serious, didn't even miss a beat. Just walked right past me, and I was like, "Oh, okay."
In the right context.
Oh, and I was just like, my wife and I talked that night. It was like, "What are we saying?"
Yeah.
It's just
We're
like,
not
oh.
gonna
And we talked like, "You can't use those adult words." Like, yeah, but like, I mean, it was just like strolling by. And okay, so I guess that's not a word we can use anymore. All right, the germ word, right? We can use the other one, right? So,
Yeah.
but and to be in that deliberate role model role is a consciousness, not a hypervigilance, right? I think that warrior puts more on their shoulders and actually disappears within themselves, versus the person who goes, "That's a trait," like Jess said, like hearing these little things over time. And then I go, "Oh, I hear these things. And now, okay, I see consistent behaviors or reinforcers for it. So that must mean I am." And what a great way to build capacity in a person's skill over time is to keep bringing up just subtly, "Hey, your enthusiasm is infectious. Hey, and your enthusiasm is infectious. I really like you effectively communicate. You're very direct in your communication, but you're also very compassionate and understanding." The person probably doesn't know they're compassionate and understanding and direct in their communication. That's just the way they speak.
Right.
But then others might go, "So that's compassion, understanding, and directedness. Huh." And then if people bring it up as a way leadership is done, then the people that come in behind them adopt it, right? And that leader moves on, but the leadership skill, the communication skill, the style lives on. Right? People always want to ask, how do you build that culture? How do you build a winning culture? Right? What is the win part? Right? You were saying, Paige, like set the foundation for it. And if we set it and then don't do anything about it, right, we build a house on sand, and it collapses, right? Whereas those subtle ways of integrating that message over time, that's consistent with what the program sees as leadership criteria or qualities, a person can really adopt and grow and become more aware of them in the environment. I just think that's such a powerful message. So I want you to keep thinking about that role model part, for both of you. So whether you want to or not. So I wanted to ask the question because I, having coached, while having competed with, trained alongside with young women, young girls as a coach, I took a great deal of pride in 70% of my group was young female athletes, and getting to know these young women. And then my coaching staff was young women. And, I grew up, with a very strong feminist mother. My first career was 95% women that I worked very closely with. I get a sense that, fostering that leadership in young women has been a message, a resonating message over time, right? And Jess, you and I talked about a lot of leadership models. If they've come from a place, they've come from often a place of maybe middle class. If it's done, empirically, then it was the older research was done with young university males, by a university male, and then published to say that this is the skill. So what are some of the ways that our sports maybe overlook the development of leadership in young females?
Yeah, I feel, I guess, very passionately about this topic, but I think that there are so many ways that sports overlook leadership and just young female athletes in general. But I think a really big one for me that I notice is that we often don't set high expectations for young female leaders to become strong leaders. And I think that specifically, like if they don't fit into the stereotypical idea that people often have about what a leader is, and that there's maybe this strong, powerful, outspoken person, and we expect that that males to have that sort of presence. But then if females don't fit into that exact mold, then we don't see them as a leader. And even worse, like we interpret those qualities, or not, some people or the sport in general may interpret those qualities as actually negative qualities in a female rather than the positive qualities that we see them in males. And you see it so often in so many things in life, not just sport, of course, but that strength that maybe a male possesses the exact same quality, and a female may be seen as something that's negative and too abrasive and too harsh. So I think that in general sport, we just aren't looking at females to be the leaders. We expect the leaders still often in our society to be males, whereas these young girls and women have the qualities, and they may not even know that they have the qualities because nobody's reaching and pulling it out of them. Like you're saying, giving that positive reinforcement. So I think that we need to be better at fostering the opportunities for girls to see those qualities in leaders that they can look up to and see themselves represented, and then recognize the qualities within themselves.
Yeah, I agree with Jessica. And then I guess just to build off of that is like, then when women are in leadership positions or positions where they can be leaders, like holding space and allowing them to kind of step into that role without kind of stealing their thunder, I feel like we're kind of at a place in society, at least in my thought process, where I'm going to have a confrontational kind of conversation as a female leader. I have to kind of like filter my language where I want to be direct and confident, but not in an attacking manner where the person that I'm communicating with will get defensive, just because of what Jessica had mentioned. Like when women have kind of those same leadership qualities that are celebrated in men are sometimes perceived as a negative when it's coming from a female perspective.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of speechless. That was awesome, ladies. When you're saying, it just came out as like, almost just socializing a natural leadership style out of a person and trying to replace it with an older ideology that isn't organic or authentic to them. And even like what came up as you were saying or you're speaking is that the masculine feminine, not male female, but the masculine feminine sort of continuum. And as if if I'm not embracing these masculine characteristics, then I must not be a leader. But they've fallen to a masculine characteristic because of the socializing agents. And leadership is not masculine. Leadership is leadership. And when we think we've got to buy into that socialized persona of what this is, I got to be, like Paige says, like I got to be direct, but then I'm caring a great deal about the relationship. So the medium is like it loses sight of the message. Like you just want to say something rather than foster a relationship along with giving somebody some really pointed and direct feedback, right? Like that. Am I off base there, Paige? Did I hear that correctly from you?
No, I don't think you're off base. That's absolutely correct. And like, so yeah, no, I agree. And just I feel like finding a way to deliver it where it'll be like positive. Well, I guess as a female leader, I want to be able to say whatever I feel like is necessary at the time and have the person on the reciprocating end, well, in a way that's authentic to me, not to be offended because it's coming from a leader, like you mentioned, like a masculine style of leadership.
And so Jess, when you're, sorry,
Paige, I was just going to mention, maybe I'm off base with that and it's kind of my own bias or how I'm perceiving the situation, but that's just kind of how I feel in certain situations.
Mm-hmm. Jess, what are your thoughts echoing Paige's sort of comments?
Yeah, I don't think that Paige is off base, and I agree. I just think I don't know. I agree. I think it's just hard at times when you're a female leader to have your thoughts and emotions being perceived in the ways that you want them to, and to not, I guess, be overshadowed, or to be kind of put down and say, okay, like hush hush, like those kind of things. And it's just, yeah, like I think it's difficult to find your way as a female leader to be authentic to yourself and to be strong and powerful, but show it in a way that will be respected by those around you. Aw. Hello.
Hello,
Hi, Poppy.
female leaders.
I was just gonna say, speaking of that,
Yeah.
this is Poppy joining the
Hi.
podcast.
Hi,
9
Poppy.
p.m. right around her bedtime.
She's
Say
like,
hi.
Mom, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I just nice segue.
Yeah.
As we care, like I like what you said, like the just such a like the hush hush part,
Yeah.
right? Like, yeah, we gave you your space to speak. What an just what an arrogant perception of like, here's your gift. That's like a misexecution of power, where basically all you're hearing in that moment is like, I'm going to show you my peacock feathers. You go ahead and display yours, but mine will be on display here shortly again. Really, like, or whatever chest bumping, sort of thumping, knuckle dragging version of whatever we feel that needs to be said. But when you don't feel the need to be hushed, when that's not there, when even if it is, you're like, you know what, that's not important right now. Like, how do you overcome that pressure, that power that maybe guys don't even see, maybe people don't even see? It's just like, it's there, I know it's there, and I'm going to keep going. Like, how do you overcome that?
I just think, honestly, in my recent experiences also, I just keep telling myself, like, no, don't make yourself small in a situation. Like, if you weren't heard, it's not because you weren't speaking things that are important and matter. It's because whoever it is, they're choosing not to listen to you. So I have honestly really tried to be very honest and expressing that it's not enough just to give me a space to speak. It's, you have to also respect my perspectives and the female perspectives that you're hearing. So I think, yeah, just being very straight up, because like you said, sometimes they may not even know that they're doing it. That just might be what they're doing, so just, yeah, being very clear and straightforward about it, and just, yeah, respecting yourself and your own opinions enough to know that they're worthwhile. Something I've definitely had to teach myself over the years, for sure. Yeah.
That was very well said, Jessica. And I think it's something this past year, actually, with the March Madness tournament. I know, I'm sure you both saw it on social media, but it was kind of the attitude of the men's tournament where it's like, oh, like, thank you for having us, like, or thank you for being here, like, we're so lucky. And then for the women's tournament, it's like, you get to be here, you should feel lucky. And just when women leaders are at the table, it's like, I guess I kind of get the impression sometimes it's like, you're here, but we didn't really want you here so you could have a voice or to speak,
Yeah, it's just like tokenism. Like, you're here so that we cover our bases. We have this female perspective, doesn't mean we're actually taking it into account, kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, well, and I think it speaks volumes to the number of powerful female leaders, whether they were coaches, leaders on their teams, leaders in organizations, professional athletes, both male and female, calling out that experience. Because what a lot of people don't know is the reason why that message has not been heard as loudly is because of that oppression, that occupation, that if you speak out, we'll take your money, or we'll speak out, we'll replace you. If you speak out, you should be grateful you're here. Basically, without saying, you should be grateful you're here. And I felt like it was just all these people put on boots and kicked down the door and said, are you effing kidding me? and that voice, that power, I followed a lot of Twitter arguments. It's like there's so much blatant ignorance to understanding, you know, "Oh, this is the first time they're speaking." No, it isn't. It absolutely not. It's just the first time you've heard.
Yeah.
So and the idea is just like, well, go. What's your play now? Because this is now out in the open. And it's always been out in the open, but it's always been out in the open just underneath open. Right. And there's that power play. There's that second class. There's that tiering, right, in sport that just is unacceptable. Right. It's absolutely unacceptable. And it sends such a negative message over time that isn't even related to an individual. It's related to an entire population of people, and future and present. So I thought so was such a powerful thing that you brought up, page 2, because it bothered me to know. I posted a 45-second clip from like Avengers Endgame on my social media page. It's like, isn't this like exactly the step-by-step process to, you know, basically take down the NCAA? Because that was great. I'm like, yeah, we'll take it from here. Exactly. Get out of the way. Because what if? Well, not what if, just what? What does it look like? Not what could. It does. Fact, in the moment, right now. Right? Sorry, soapbox rant away. My bad, I went off. So using your own experiences, so that what's a lasting message you want young people to know about leadership qualities and expectations? You know, what's that lasting message you want, you know, young female leaders, young leaders, people that are influenced by you, whether directly in the inner circle or outer circle? What's that lasting message you want them to hear from you?
I guess I would say that there's no one perfect set of qualities to make a great leader, and that a leader is not someone who's in the absence of emotions or doesn't experience failures and difficulties, but it is in those failures and difficulties and the response that that person has to those adversities that creates a truly powerful leader and somebody to look up to. And really, no one expects a perfect person as a leader. It's just about how the leader can respond and continue to set an example for those around them through those adversities. And just to know that the qualities that you possess as a person is enough to be a leader, whatever your strengths are.
I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that, but what kind of came to my mind was, you know, like be yourself and try your best. I would say, like, I'm the perfect example with Poppy here. It's just like, come as you are and do your best that day and be authentic to like you as a person.
Well, and both of you, you know, spoke to that authenticity, you know, and it is enough as a starting point. And then the environment that's developed is really where, I can do this, I can grow this, I can be this, I can have a voice, it doesn't have to be on some, you know, the socio-cultural element of sport. It doesn't have to be on the masculine feminism or masculine feminine scale. It doesn't have to be male, female. It doesn't have, they're just the qualities that a person strives to develop, and then has the environment and the support and the mentorship and the role models around them to grow them. Like, that was really well said. I don't have anything to add. Wow. I'm going back though. My big thing is I want to come back to that humility, silence, you know, where I asked the question about role models and you both just spent about 4 seconds sitting quietly. If anybody wanted to know what humility looks like, you got it. Both these ladies just went bam. Okay, well, I'm not going to talk about myself. So next question, Matt. You know, I thought that was awesome. So just maybe that speaks to the amazing character that the two of you demonstrate. So likely, I would say. Thank you so much for hanging out and having this conversation and sharing the, you know, kitten coming in the background and the poppies rolling in and having fun. And I mean, I love it. So thank you so much for hanging out tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It was
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you, and nice meeting you, Jessica.
Yeah, YouTube page is awesome. Thanks so much.
Well, we get to talk again soon, ladies, and questions, comments, follow-ups. I'm going to post this on the YouTube page. I'll send both of you the link. You feel to share it with people, and share it as well, and keep growing. So, hold on.
Thank you both. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Have a good
Yeah,
one.
well.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.